G'day, welcome to Society, Robots and Us, where we're looking at inclusive robotics across the board. We're recording tonight and we will be sharing the recording in the weeks to come. And hopefully this is going to serve as a little bit of a draft paper on what are the various aspects of inclusivity as it intersects with robotics, because I believe robotics is the most important technology of the 21st century. How do we make it the most impactful in all of the best ways? And we've looked at the subject in our previous Society, Robots and Us. Tonight, we're going to look at the subject from the perspective of investment. What is inclusive investment? What could inclusive investment be, particularly when we're looking at deep tech investments, investments into emerging technologies, and investments that are really, that have the potential to have a huge impact. And, you know, one of the questions is who is going to be benefiting from the impact of these technologies? And the field of investment is, well, neither is it monolithic, nor is it permanent. And there are many changes that are occurring within the investment community. And investment as it intersects with robotics is primarily focused around early stage deep tech investment, but not solely. And so I'm delighted to be joined by three fabulous speakers tonight. And we've had an emergency last minute replacement. Kira Gardner from the CITRIS Foundry was not well, and her colleague Mikhail Holst has stepped in at the last minute. So I'm very much appreciate that, Mikhail, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. We also have Harries from the Robotics Hub and Swati Chaturvedi, the co-founder of PropelX, which sprang from the MIT Angels Group and has gone through many startup-like iterations. And I'll let Swati explain a little bit more about that. We will be joined by Goldberg, as usual, our artist and roboticist. And I'm Andra, the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics and a visiting scholar at the CITRIS People and Robots Group. Finally, I do want to acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Maloney people, an unrecognized tribe of First Peoples. And indeed, because this is a Zoom, an online event, then to acknowledge the traditional owners, the first peoples of all of the lands that we're in. And the format for tonight is I'm going to pass the microphone, as it were, from speaker to speaker. If you have questions, then you can put them into the chat and I will forward them across. I will also ask a few questions myself, and we will lead towards a general discussion, but we will start initially with Michael. So Michael, can you please introduce yourself a little bit, as well as what has brought you to your current role in the Robotics Hub?
It would be a pleasure. Thank you, Andra. Look, it's fantastic to be here, and look, thank you for having me first be part of this very important discussion. And I think these are important questions to explore. So I'm with the Robotics Hub. We're an early stage deep tech fund focused on both advanced robotics and emerging AI, particularly where these things lead to augmented intelligence driving a basically person with machine rather than person versus machine setup. We're both technologists and operators, and we like to get directly involved with our companies. This is an area that we see, as Andra said, you know, these technologies are evolving very rapidly, and we're seeing more and more opportunities to address world-scale human needs. And indeed, you know, part of our criteria is to identify companies that we see that can really make a significant difference. The sorts of companies we have in the portfolio include Agility Robotics. We were the first money into Agility at one end. So this is taking humans out of tasks that cause injury. And then at the other end, AI-focused technologies with aerial precision medicine focused on solving pancreatic disorders, or at least addressing them and working out how to best identify the right care plan for people. In terms of my background, I'm a background in AI and startups. Ended up in enterprise software for quite a few years, and then moved to the US to set up a startup accelerator for CITRIS, which was fantastic, and we were able to really bring some interesting companies to bear, including companies that were doing things like an upside down VMware, and companies bringing different types of AI to bear. So you know, natural language understanding, computer vision, and such like. Now, just I have a couple of thoughts to throw into the mix in terms of you know, growing diversity and inclusiveness. So to date in our practice, one of the ways that we try to avoid, I guess, or try to be inclusive, is to use a formal ranking mechanism, right? So 16 criteria that span, you know, is this technology transformative? How good is this team in terms of leadership and the capabilities of the team? What's the product horizon? How quickly can this thing get to market? And what are the platform characteristics? So a fairly broad set of criteria. And the intent there is that we are able to look at our candidate investments in a hands-off sort of way. Is it perfect? No. But does it get us closer to avoiding our biases? Yes, it's a step. We also focus on improving ecosystem access in the early stages of these companies, both in terms of getting involved with the companies, in terms of bringing Silicon Valley know-how to companies outside Silicon Valley, and then ongoing to really reduce the difference between someone who's come from, so generational wealth, and someone who's come from a family of farmers in Idaho, for example. So they're the things that we're doing at the moment. The other one that I have to flag is that clearly this is a field that's pretty heavily dominated by white males, and so the supply of firms that we see, I mean, it is biased. It's, you know, indisputably so, which makes things challenging. Although we've had some success in using these approaches. The other one to flag, and that won't be necessarily obvious to people who aren't on the investment side, we have a fiduciary duty, right? So we're taking money from our limited partners and investing that money, and we have a duty of care to find the best possible investments, right? So, or indeed to get the best possible multiple. So our overlay must always be to find the best companies, and yes, this can be subjective. And indeed, you know, there's funds with diversity mandates, and that's a wonderful thing. Ultimately, though, this is a business, a game that's really measured by dollars returned to the LP. So, interesting discussion. I'm really interested in you know, exploring the area and learning from the discussion today.
Thanks very much, Michael. I've made a little note of the points that you've raised, and I appreciate you bringing up locational or geographic inclusivity, because I think it would be definitely worth exploring US-centric vis global, and what are the different movements that are happening there. You also brought up the question of fiducial duty to the LP. And, you know, usually we focus on really two aspects of inclusivity in investment. One is what does the founding team look like? And secondly, what does the investing team look like? And I would like to throw it open to say also, what do the investors into the investment group, look like? And how often do you run into funds that have a thesis around whose money they take, or, not so much purpose-driven investment per se, but does purpose-driven investment inform also the sorts of investor that go into funds? And if you've got any direct stories, please let me know now. Otherwise, I'll just put that one out there as a potential discussion topic as we move through the discussion.
Nothing at the moment. I will say that certainly having a focus not in Silicon Valley and around, in this case, around CMU, many of our investors come from that geography, right? So there's an element there where they would like to see more investment happening in that city. So I think that there is certainly elements of that happen, particularly when you raise the US-centric or indeed Silicon Valley-centric versus other investments.
Oh, very, very interesting. And of course, one of the complaints that is usually raised against investments that come through economic development organizations is that they put the region first rather than the success of the technology first. And that ends up really hamstringing the efforts. Is that something that you see?
I think the balance there is as said, we are very clear about finding the best possible teams. Now, it happens that we're drawing from a particularly strong pool of entrepreneurs, both spread across America and in Silicon Valley. So I'm not seeing that as a major issue. We are very biased towards best possible companies based on across the range of companies that we're seeing at a given time.
And as you very clearly put at the start, across a formal ranking methodology,
so. Yep.
So that it's not subject to as many biases in that process. Now, I'd like to pass the mic over to Swati Chaturvedi, who's the CEO and co-founder of PropelX, which evolved out of MIT Angels as an angel investment platform. And Swati is also an investor at the Newton Fund as well. And perhaps you could explain a little bit about, both what your current roles are now and how they've evolved as well, Swati.
Yes, absolutely. So, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad I'm part of this discussion and representing myself. So I am the CEO of PropelX. PropelX is an online investment platform where we enable accredited investors to invest in startups. And we also have a fund which is affiliated with the platform, Newton Fund. Newton Fund is a seed or an early stage investor in companies that appear on the PropelX platform. Through the platform, we've now closed almost 100 deals. About 26 million has been invested. So it's sometimes more, sometimes less per company. But our typical check sizes for each company in the past 2 years have been about $350,000. So that's what the average goes into each company. And Newton Fund, of course, is part of that total average. And my personal background, I grew up in India and I came here to the US. I went to Berkeley, I went to MIT, became a management consultant for some time, and then went back to Sloan to get my MBA degree, and there started my investing journey. I did my earliest summer at Temasek, which is quasi-hedge fund, almost public market investing, very late stage. I worked at Siemens Venture Capital in their growth equity. And then I worked at a private equity fund here in San Francisco Bay Area, doing late stage carve-outs of the back ends of insurance firms. Not the most exciting. And that's when I realized my passion really is science. And that's my real passion. I'm very excited to learn about new technologies that are leveraging breakthroughs in science and tech to change the trajectory of humankind. And I wanted to be an investor. I wanted to participate in these kinds of companies. And that's why I started MIT Angels as a way to angel invest into these. I found, to my dismay, that angel investing is really, or at least at that time, it fell into the realm of the ultra high net worths. It wasn't really available to most people, even if they're accredited by, the SEC standards. And so I started PropelX as a way to democratize investing in these kinds of companies, but also because I really felt that deep technology startups, they go on to become the Teslas of the world, but they find it really hard to raise financing in their earliest stages. I'm sure many of you have experienced that, and indeed it is hard. And so I'm really proud that through PropelX, not only have we closed almost 100 rounds, but that 19% of them have been female founders, and almost half of them have been minority-led. So that brings us kind of to the current topic of discussion, which is what it means to me, what inclusive investing means to us. We should define it, and what we are doing to make the world a more inclusive place. So let's start with the definition. So earlier this year, around the International Women's Day, we thought, oh, let's analyze our investments. Let's figure out how many women have received investment. And that is when we said, okay, while we're doing women, let's also do diversity. And that's when we encountered the meaning of diversity. Believe it or not, it is so fuzzy. And especially when you're trying to analyze investments after the fact, it no longer matters what people look like. They may identify as something completely different. So it became so fuzzy for us that we came out with a very rigid definition so that people know that this is the most conservative estimate. And the way we define, or the way we calculated our 19%, is 19%, which is companies led by women, and about 46% minorities. So we very narrowly defined minority because we ended up in this endless discussion on what is minority. Is it just color? Is it gender? Is it how you identify? And how you identify is not apparent from people's faces or names or what have you. So eventually we came out with this very narrow definition that we can clearly see from their pictures, which is, I apologize to everyone out there that it is such a bad definition, but it is a place for us to start, which is we said, okay, people that are of Asian or South Asian or African-American origin, that's it. So it really, and women, of course, people who look like women and some, identify as women from outward appearance. But while we were doing that, it became apparent to us that this is such a poor definition, and we need to do a better job of collecting data, right? And so that is something for us to do. But even then, I am proud to say that 19% of the deals that we've done have been female-led, and almost half, which is 46% of the deals that we've done have been minority-led. And so by our definition, by our narrow definition. So that is how we defined it. That is what, and in the course of it, we realized it means a lot more. It means a lot more, and we need to do a lot more, and it's simply not enough, but at least we've made a start. So I'll start with that, what it means to be inclusive. Why do I think is it important? And I do want to emphasize that. So that is a question I've often asked myself. Why are people emphasizing that boards be made of women or be more diverse? Shouldn't it be the case that we only want to make money, and that is the metric of success? Actually, as Michael pointed out, most VCs, he's right, have this fiduciary duty. And so why would diversity play into it, right? Turns out that, and now there is data. Now there is data to show that at least female-led business, there's data on female-led businesses have delivered higher returns than others. And so the question we should ask is why? And the reason, and there can be many, many reasons. This is a very long discussion, but what I think I'm sharing with you, I think it is valuable to have a different perspective. And leaders that are open to different perspectives will enable themselves to think out of the box rather than kind of run-of-the-mill thinking. And perhaps that is why they have delivered better returns. Perhaps there is a different emotional IQ to it. And that is why they have delivered better. We don't know. I certainly don't know. But there is data that they have delivered better returns. And that perhaps could be a reason that there are so many venture funds that are coming up now, which explicitly focus on diversity. There's many funds that are focused on Black people, many funds that are focused on women and other minorities. So perhaps the reasons are that they could deliver higher returns, and we'll know. Time will tell. Time will tell. So what are we doing about it? That's the final thing I will address, because these are the questions that Andra had asked us. So I'm just going through what it means. You know, why do we think it's important? What are we doing about it? What we're doing about it is trying to be blind, trying to be blind to color, to gender, to everything else. When we made our investments or when we onboarded companies, we never cared. Is this a woman? Is it a Black person? Is it a brown person? Never thought about it, right? But the point is that we were in fact blind and we were not swayed by color. It didn't matter to us. I think I'm hopeful that as we progress in newer generations, it doesn't matter to people. People can be whatever color, whatever gender, whatever ethnicity. It shouldn't matter. The reason I think that people have faltered in the past is because unbeknownst to them, not that people are bad, but unbeknownst to them, there are certain biases which have crept in. My suspicion is that because I'm a woman and because I'm brown myself, that bias didn't occur to me, maybe, you know? So the thing to do, or what we have ended up doing, is being blind to all these differences. As a result, what we have got is 19% female founders, 46% minority founders. So I'll just stop there, and there's lots to be discussed. I'm happy to discuss more as we go along. Sorry to take up so much time.
No, that's wonderful, Swati. You've really given us a comprehensive set of answers, and I think that you know, you've finished with a couple of very important points. One, we are seeing a greater number of we are seeing greater diversity entering into the investment community, and in some instances, it may be because it is seen as an opportunity space, a niche opportunity space that is not yet well developed. But in other instances, then I agree with you that it is a fiduciary duty when there is overwhelming evidence, when you look for that evidence, that investment into, for example, female founders tend to have a higher success rate across the board. So are you being a better shepherd of your LPs' funds if you don't look at diverse founders? Perhaps should be how firms are thinking about it. But at the same time, you've raised the issues around, do we even know what that means? How do we measure diversity? How can we then compare our track record and results over time? And I was so delighted to hear the steps that you've taken to actually define and report, because I think those are just critical steps. Now, Brock put a very interesting question into the chat, but I think we'll come back to that and let Mikhail Holst, who is currently with the CITRIS Foundry and has got a very strong background in a range of investment areas, including Singularity University. I'd love to hear from you now, Mikhail, and if you'd like to explain again what you're doing right now and how you've come to that position and how this informs you in the topic of what is inclusive investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Andra, and thanks everyone else. My apologies again that Kira couldn't be here today. I know she was looking forward to this very much and has a lot of great thoughts on this topic. She's out sick with a sick child. So I'll do my best in her place. So a quick background about me. And so I'm at CITRIS Foundry. CITRIS Foundry is an incubator for early stage deep tech companies within the University of California system. We span 4 different UC campuses, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Merced, and UC Santa Cruz. So we're pretty spread out geographically, but only, really right now, I think California. We are very early stage. We like to position ourselves pre-accelerator. We think there's an important role to play there. We also don't invest in companies, which is, in a way, it's fortunate because we are so early stage. We get to be more flexible with the founders that we invite into our programs. We really are just betting on people and ideas. Most of these founders are so early stage, they don't, haven't even formed a business yet, many of them. So they don't have the same financial business metrics that you have to look at when you are investing, which makes the process more complicated. Previously, before the Foundry, I was, as Andra mentioned, at a venture-backed startup of startups called Singularity University. I was there for about 7.5 years, running all manner of entrepreneurship programs in that time, early stage incubators, accelerators, corporate startup pilot innovation programs, open innovation, you name it, we did it. And that was a really good experience and really great opportunity to get experience from many sides of the table. We ended up raising a small seed fund for our accelerator, investing in a handful of companies. I ended up doing a lot of work on that side, doing the due diligence, interviewing startups, finding promising candidates to invest in. That was an interesting role because we were so aggressively international there. The overwhelming majority of our participants and founders were not from the US. I was just doing some refreshing my memory, and in our first cohort of startups that we invested in, actually none of the founders were from America. That kind of tells you, gives you an insight into that. Now, spent most of my career in the tech for social entrepreneurship realm. Originally studied CS and anthropology, always been very interested in how people use technology to solve big problems. That led me to the realm of tech social entrepreneurship. That's where I spent most of my career to date. That led me to CITRIS Foundry, where we have a similar mission of we're looking to support founders who are trying to change the world with new technologies. Now, some interesting notes on that. So, as I said, we are very early stage and we don't necessarily participate in the ecosystem as investors, but what we are trying to do is really give more people the opportunity to be exposed to entrepreneurship. And that hopefully these people will then go on to start companies. So you can think of us as like the highest upstream you can really go within the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So we feel we have a pretty important role there of bringing in diverse candidates of people here. And, like I said, we are a little lucky in that we have this multi-campus reach. So we can reach out to founders from Merced, from Davis, Santa Cruz. There's also an interesting, I'm relatively new to this organization. I've been here about a year. There is an interesting difference in the level of entrepreneurship activity between the different campuses. Berkeley was recently rated the #2 school for entrepreneurship in the country. We're very proud of that, just behind Stanford. And there is no shortage of entrepreneurship activity, programs, clubs, you name it. There's so much going on at Berkeley. So if you're within Berkeley, you have a lot of access to entrepreneurship resources. The other campuses don't have that same luxury. So one thing we've been focusing on since I've joined is how can we increase access to this whole sector of an economy for these other campuses that are still building their entrepreneurship ecosystems. It's not to say they don't have any, they definitely do. But I think they would all tell you that it's not quite at the level of Berkeley. So in terms of how we, ourselves look at, diversity, we're using all the obvious metrics everyone talked about already. We also have that additional angle of the campus. Like I said, we just closed applications for our next cohort, which will begin this fall. We're very happy that we've had more applicants from the other campuses than ever before, which is great. We are trying to expand that reach outward, give more opportunities to explore entrepreneurship for people who haven't. That's something Kira and I talk about a lot, is there are definite quantifiable real differences in the types of people who participate in this ecosystem. I recently read a report from the UC about how I think it was 69% of the incubator and accelerator participants in these programs had parents who went to college. Something like 40+% of those were parents with graduate degrees. So that kind of speaks to who already is showing up in these programs from another angle. Now, I think that's interesting because I've never been asked about that. And I've never asked anyone that, like, what was the education level of your parents or the background of your parents? But there is clearly a role there in who shows up for these programs. People who are willing to take the risk. I mean, entrepreneurship is inherently a risky, difficult type of business where over 90% of them fail. And if you have, you can look at some of the most successful founders of, billion-dollar startups, and most of them tend to come from families that have the advantage of being able to support them should this venture not work out. That's not the case for everyone. So how can we increase access to this growing sector of the economy where, yes, it is very difficult. Majority of startups don't succeed, but for those that do, there are big returns. And we don't want only a small subset of people to be able to participate in that. So thinking a lot about how we can increase entrepreneurship beyond even just this incubator. How can we just expose these ideas, teach people concepts about entrepreneurship, get them thinking about it at an early stage, undergraduate level, could be really valuable for a lot of folks who maybe wouldn't have considered it otherwise if they didn't have those same opportunities. I think Michael also mentioned earlier about, the geographic diversity is also very interesting to me because, we have now, there are some, I believe they're called, is it development zones within the US where we can, support, they're trying to incentivize investment activity in these areas, which is important because over 90% of all venture capital flows to just 5 cities in the US. So that's not, there's a consolidation happening there. And what if you can't afford to spend thousands of dollars to live in a studio in San Francisco to build your company? It becomes a lot harder. Something like, don't quote me on this, but I think it's something like less than 10% of all federal grants go to rural areas. And so we're seeing this growing gap and inequalities emerging in all sectors of the US economy, not just entrepreneurship, which is troubling to me personally. So thinking back, okay, we have this reach, we have this opportunity. What can we at the Foundry do about it? We are trying to really do the most we can to bring in more people into this, expose more people to innovation and entrepreneurship early on, bring diverse cohorts of people. We are focused on deep tech for social issues. It's very important to have diverse perspectives for global problems. No small one group of people is probably going to be able to solve any problem that's very substantial for global. And as has also been mentioned earlier on this call, those diverse teams have been shown to outperform teams that are not. We also make sure that every cohort we bring in, we talk about the importance of building a diverse workforce. As they are so early, many of these teams haven't hired anyone yet, or they're just about to. There has been research on this topic that shows, I think it's about after your eighth hire, your culture is basically locked in for your company. Making sure founders are aware of this, making sure that they're building diverse teams early. It's a natural tendency for a lot of startups. And, people mean well. It's, oh, well, I'm doing this thing. I have this friend I went to school with. I think they'd be great. And maybe they would. And maybe because they're your friend, you can convince them to take this crazy job with you that won't pay very well, if at all. But there's ways around that. I mean, we spend a lot of time teaching our founders about the importance of communications, having a strong mission. That gives them a lot of power to attract a diverse pool of candidates, attract investors and other people. So we're really trying to do everything we can to empower them to have the most power that a little startup can, so that they have the opportunity to build diverse workforces, bring in diverse investors, advisors, a more broad coalition of people who are going to work on these things with them.
Those are great points, Mikhail. Like, I think, you touched on diversity in founding team, diversity in, in the growth of that founding team, and then diversity in workforce as a downstream as well. And I've just uploaded the video from our Hiring for Inclusivity talk, which was just fascinating. And so I want to transcribe it and write a post about it, but we learned so much on the discussion about inclusive hiring, as you alluded to. Now, there are a few great questions coming up as well, but I'd like to ask Ken if you've got some comments or questions before we go to more general discussion. And Ken Goldberg, artist and roboticist and director of the CITRIS People and Robots Group.
Thank you, Andra. I really appreciate that you put this together, and you have such extremely talented and appropriate guests. I really think this is an important topic for us all to be considering. I have been teaching at Cal for 25 years in engineering, and recently have a startup, Ambi Robotics. It is now going through its multiple stages of investment, and it's been very, very enlightening for me to think about these exact issues. I think that it's very true, this idea of the fiduciary responsibility to the investors. We feel this very much at the company level. We're told, it's really drilled in. You're doing, you're making decisions for the good of the company, and you really do. You have for the investors in the company, and in turn, those investors do it for the LPs, limited partners in their fund. So we really understand that. I mean, I understand how that the logic of that works. It's interesting also that it tends to, really drive. What's driven is the bottom line, and there is this idea of blindness. What Swati mentioned is, to be blind to, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what someone's background is. We want to be able to the metric is it successful? Is this working? And is there a return on investment? Now, what I think though is problematic, and what I think what's so interesting about this discussion here is that there's much more that we're at stake. That we are, in fact, thinking very deeply about diversity and hiring, and I, by the way, think about diversity very broadly in gender, ethical, race, nationality, geography, social economic background, disability, and also intellectual perspective. In other words, people come from such different rich backgrounds that we want that diversity. It's very important because I firmly believe that leads to innovation and creativity. It's essential. If you have a bunch of people who are very similar, which is very natural tendency, you get an echo chamber and people just start basically agreeing, and they can get locked into a local minima. And so it's not good. You need people around to challenge and diverse backgrounds. So I firmly believe in the benefit of that. But I want to address the question of blindness, because I think what happens is the danger, and this is just something I'm thinking about, and I'm happy to discuss, because I also was proud of sense of my blindness, right? It really didn't matter, it seems, at least consciously to me. But since in the last few years, I've really been thinking that it has to matter. I have to be actually acknowledging that I do see these differences, and I actively care about them, and I actively take note of them. What I mean by that is that I have to create an environment where we talk about these things openly. And so in my lab at Berkeley, where I have 30 students, we are always talking about diversity and issues around this. I mean, it's important, and I want my students to feel comfortable talking about these issues and feeling comfortable understanding that sometimes a little bit of extra effort has to be shown to reach out to those who wouldn't normally be would be in our laboratory or in our company. So by that, and this is something I've learned from you, Andra, is that for hiring, it's not enough to just say, hey, we don't discriminate, right? The standard boilerplate. But more than that, we have to demonstrate that we actually seek out and walk the walk, meaning that we have to have role models in our company. We have to show that this is a priority, and not just, we'll wait to see how things settle, but because that's not good enough. It's not going to just fall out that way. So we have to actively seek out people with these backgrounds and then nurture them and make them feel supported. And that's, by the way, another process is not only just attracting them to your organization, but then getting them to thrive. And that's so important. And I think I hope that resonates with the investors here. And I think it's interesting at all levels because, Michael, as you said, it starts, at this early stage before they've even filled out their Delaware, corporate C Corp papers. There's a stage where they can start to act like entrepreneurs. In fact, my friend recently told me that his son started a paper, worked in a paper delivery. And then he figured out, he said, what are you doing? You're supposed to be out, you got to get out and deliver the papers. He said, oh, no, don't worry, Dad. I got that covered. I hired 2 kids to do it for me. So this kid was already figured out that he could divide and conquer. And he's a little entrepreneur. But that was interesting because he's, 8 years old, right? But I think that that's where it can start. And we have to make it available, this kind of thinking, this experience to kids at all levels. And I like this idea of doing it in college, but I think it's really interesting to even think about it in high schools. And I think there's also this incredible value of failing early. I had several startups in my career that didn't work out. And I would have to say those were incredibly valuable. I learned a huge amount from those. And it really informed the decisions we made with Ambi, that we started small. We didn't take a huge amount of investment until we were ready. We really built an A list of advisors and investors. We were really careful and strategic about our moves. That has paid off quite well so far. And I think that idea of what I think is a curse is the investor the entrepreneur that makes a huge splash, sells his or her company for millions of dollars, and then considers themselves an enormous success at age 22, and rarely are they happy for the rest of their life. So I'll just close by saying I think that so many of these issues we're raising about how do we reach out, how do we really prime that pump so that we can get those great participants at all levels, the investor, the entrepreneurs, those willing to take the risks at all levels to go out and be part of a startup, and also have them engage with investors who, by the way, the last thing I'll say is I have been so surprised by how actively investors, the role they play in advising. They're very hands-on, and that is incredibly useful. You have the benefit of someone who's seen hundreds of companies sitting down with you for an hour and just looking and helping you make decisions. It's incredible. So that, I want to say, is something that I see that as something, and maybe I could turn that back to Swati and Michael and Mikhail, is how do you see your role as a mentor in bringing these young entrepreneurs to success?
That's a great point, Ken. Like, you're really talking about how, who is leading the development of the ecosystem around investment. And obviously, Swati, Mikhail, and Michael are all playing very strong parts in developing new forms of investment or investment ecosystem. And I think this actually goes right back to what Swati was talking about democratizing angel investing as well. And the discussion from Mikhail around aggressive globalization, and from Michael around non-Silicon Valley centric investments. And I'll hand over to you, to whoever wants to dive in on this for comments.
Maybe I'll jump in at this point. So the first one, Ken, would be absolutely that the mentoring thing. You know, in many ways, that's it's part of the joy of this sort of role, right? It's wonderful to be able to step in and share some ideas and have no responsibility for them. But equally, what I find is that being a sounding board for young entrepreneurs is one thing, but frankly, in many cases, as an entrepreneur, you've got 1,000 things going on. And so at all levels, to be able to help people see and focus on the critical things seems to make a big difference. And so I think that's an absolutely core part of what we do at Robotics Hub. And frankly, it's what I've seen as a core part of what many investors do. I did want to throw in one other thought here. What I've observed is that the best entrepreneurs, if I've found a great leader, a great team, they tend towards this inclusivity. They tend towards wanting to build a diverse team, right? It doesn't happen in all cases, and obviously, you know, there's a push and there's a focus on what culture do you want to build. This is the time you're going to build a culture, get it right. But the really good ones, if we've done our job, find a team that has people of many different from many different backgrounds. And that's true whether or not they're, you know, individually diverse, right? And so you know, a lot of this depends on the draw. And one of the things that hasn't come up has been, certainly in my field, in robotics and AI, you know, we're getting more women in the space, which is fantastic, but it's not great yet. But certainly there's not very many. The number of African Americans in the space is not at all high. So I think that there's a massive question here around, you know, how do we get people exposure to STEM education earlier, or work out what those gaps are early, because these are really valuable perspectives that we're just completely missing at the moment. Well, not completely missing, but I'd have to say I'm not seeing very many of those people in the sorts of companies that we're working with, which is a terrible shame.
Well, thank you, Michael. And, you know, I was reflecting on what Mikhail was talking about the imbalance between the various University of California campuses, how those with, I guess, comfort around entrepreneurship were found in Berkeley, whereas in the other campuses, there was far less of a culture, and, you know, there are many factors that related to that as well. So, you know, it sounds as though investors can do a lot to help steer or change the culture of companies, and that's an interesting point to draw out of that. Swati, or Mikhail, do you have a comment?
No, I actually wanted to go back to what Ken said, which is, yes, I completely agree. We need to be more actively thinking of the culture we're building, of the teams that we have, of who we're hiring, and so on. So actually, I buy into that point. It so happens, sorry, apologies. It so happened that a starting point can be to not care that you're a particular type. And then once you're there and comfortable, then to start caring that you're other type or more diverse, right? So I do believe that is very important. I do want to go back to the question that Ken wrapped up with. What are we doing to be mentors to people? And I think the first thing that we can do is invest in diverse people. And the other thing that I personally advocate for, I think it also goes back to Michael's point about the whole business of fiduciary responsibility. that onus lies on LPs. And I do believe that LPs need to invest in diverse VCs themselves, because that is how they will start to see investments from there on into diverse startups. So I think LPs, the big pension funds, they need to do more about it. I am an advocate for that. And I have written quite a few times here and there that I think LPs have a responsibility, especially the big ones. They have a responsibility to bring in more diversity, because it's not, so firstly, I do believe that it will yield greater returns, although that is not supported by data at this point, other than for female founders, and that I proudly tout all the time. It may result in higher returns. I think it might, but it might also result in a better, more equitable world, which I think many of us want to live in. So in going back to, okay, what are we doing? We're advocating. We're actively investing ourselves, which we must advocate. We must raise our voice, and we must ask for other people to be involved in this. I mean, this is a subject I'm passionate about. So I do think we must actively ask, and we must question, and all that goes with that. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Swati. That's always very good, passionate perspectives as well. And I think each of you have talked very much around what you've seen, what you've been doing, what you've been involved in as well in investment. And just for the final minutes, I'd like to ask, are you seeing other trends in investment that could either help or harm inclusivity? This is a very broad question, but I think we're seeing more globalization in investment, in early stage deep tech investment. We might be seeing more attention to funding investable companies from some US federal funding agencies, and yet that is contrasted by other federal funding agencies funding science and small business rather than investable science-based companies. We've seen a lot of changes in angel investment. And so I was just going to put it broadly. What are the trends? But I know Ken has got something to say. So over to you, Ken.
Well, thank you, Andra. I do think there's one trend that I'm curious how the investors feel about this. But one trend is that it's sort of somewhat of a seller's market right now for entrepreneurs. And I'm curious if you find this, that really, I've heard this over and over again, that investors are really trying to get in on deals with the best companies. And so that's an interesting position, right? So entrepreneurs should know that they're in a very good position. Now, who knows how long that will last, but at least let's enjoy it while it lasts. Now, the reason I bring that up is that it means that there's a certain element of how do you appeal to these really good young entrepreneurs, these winning bets that you want to find. And I think that one of those things, and this comes back to the idea of being blind or not, is the degree to which you are advocating publicly as an ally of these groups. You don't have to be Black, let's say, to say we are really advocates of Black entrepreneurs or Native American, or you can sort of emphasize, and so you can do programs that might be educational programs, mentoring programs, just a podcast like this. And what I think that would do is it would convey that, wait, this is a company that I want to work with, to an entrepreneur. So I think that entrepreneurs, and by the way, I think, Swati, to your point, those sort of, when I look at minority students who have scrambled their way up to get into a place like Berkeley, and they're tough. They've overcome a lot of adversity to get there. So they're a good bet, I would say. and they're gonna really make things happen in many cases. They've got that grit and tenacity. So, but you want to find them and say, why should they work with you? And I think the key is that you want to show, as you're doing, I think to a large degree, but how can it even be more? How can you convey, hey, we are here, that's our mission, and that's something we care about. And if you convey that in a way, then it will bring those entrepreneurs to you. So I'm curious if that resonates for all three of you.
Definitely resonates for me. I think we've written about it. Occasionally, we have been more mission focused on deep tech. So we've had this conversation. Should we talk about how well we're doing on minorities? And we've always come out with, you know what? Our main mission is funding deep tech startups. I don't want us to dilute our message. I fully support diversity. Absolutely. We'll do what we can, but we need to be clear about what our mission is. The other thing I would say is that ageism is a very big thing. And we have actively tried to work with older people as well. And I haven't tracked the ages of our founders. That's even harder to track. But we have worked with founders of all ages. Especially I think in deep tech, you tend to have people who have the experience, and so they typically are older. They're not 22 years old all the time, and I'm very happy to be working with them as much as I am with the energy of 22-year-olds. So I would say that I hear you, that we must do more to say that we welcome diverse founders. I think we should. But also we have, or just speaking for ourselves, we have focused more on our main mission, which is promoting investments in deep tech startups, which also, by the way, are grossly underfunded. But as a secondary mission, certainly, this is something we care about.
Thank you very much, Swati. And a final comment from Michael and Mikhail.
So I'll just throw in that look, Ken, I think I completely agree. I agree with what Swati said there as well, but this idea of being very clearly an ally is something that I mean, it doesn't have to be the core mission, and it is something that it's a great point. We should all be making a greater effort around being visibly an ally for these groups, which is not to say necessarily that hey, you know, show up as a minority group, you're definitely going to get funded, but it is to say, you know, you'll certainly get a meeting, and we'll certainly do what we can to help and help to steer along the way. And I think that's I would hope that that's something that even if not explicit is fairly common across many of the investors in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I can say on this perhaps is that we also try and make a point to show that representation matters a lot too, and that we are making sure that we show founders from diverse backgrounds, perspectives, ages, in our, like, who we are as the Foundry. So just to give you an example, we have recruiting videos that not recruiting videos, we have promotions for our application. We run 2 cohorts a year. We try and get people to apply. We started getting testimonials from founders who can say like, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is my company, this is why the Foundry is good for us. Making sure that you have a lot of diverse founders, I think, is very important for showing people that people like you are doing this and they're succeeding. And it's not just people that look like me going up and, you know, waving my hand, but really trying to be as inclusive of as many different types of voices as possible whenever we can, to encourage and show people that this is something you can do, and this is, and if you want to, we're here for you and we're happy to help. I think that's pretty important too.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. And I just realized, of course, the other thing that has changing is that the investment community itself is being more welcoming for diverse investors. And, you know, I'm seeing more opportunities available to gain experience and to, you know, be able to participate in investment. And so that is one of the trends. Now we've reached the hour and it's time to say goodbye. This was a great conversation and I have pages and pages of notes to follow up with. And I want to thank everybody for very thoughtful questions in the chat, and you know, really spurring a lot of interesting discussion here. And thank you very much to our speakers tonight. And
I would add, by the way, I think Swati and Mikhail and Michael, the very fact that you're here tonight is exactly what that we're talking about. I think that you took the time out of your busy schedules to talk about these issues is the kind of signaling that we're discussing, and it's extremely valuable because students and future startups, you know, entrepreneurs are here and will listen to this and the recording, and we will talk about it and talk you up. And I think that's what, you know, I think that's why you're so good at what you do. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Ken. And a great finish to a great discussion. I hope to get the video up online a little bit faster than the last ones, but you can see the previous Society Robots and Us on YouTube. I put a link into the chat there. And again, thank you all. Good night.